Stilly Doe, identified as Othaniel Ames. Othaniel Philip Ames was a dairyman from Arlington, Washington. He was born in the Midwest on August 23, 1898. He went by the name of Otie. Otie had been in poor health, but he didn't let it get him down, and while he was 82 and suffering from heart disease, he just kept going. He told everyone he was taking a trip in 1980, and he never returned home. His family had no idea what happened to Otie. The same year, Spencer Fuentes was just a teenage boy. He found a body when he was fly fishing in a nearby river in 1980 near his home in Savannah, Washington. There was a man caught in a log jam in the nearby river, and so he ran to a neighbor to call the police, but the sheriff's deputy who responded was less than impressed. He said he didn't believe it was actually a body because no one had been reported missing, and he didn't want to bother to go get it, but Mr. Fuentes was insistent, and the deputy finally agreed. He traipsed out into the river and was only gone a few moments before he came back saying, "Yep, that's a body." The man that was found was wearing Winthrop dress shoes with arch supports made of leather, metal, and paper. They believed he'd been there for a few months. He was wearing a belt buckle with the initials GRN on it. The police were unable to identify the man, and no one with those initials had gone missing. They believed he likely was of Native American descent. An autopsy would be done, and there were no signs of trauma, nor did the man drown. It was believed he passed from natural causes. His age was difficult to narrow down, but they thought he was likely 30, maybe to 70, which is pretty wide. They said he was around 5'6" with poor dental health. The best clue to his identity seemed to be the initials on the belt buckle, the red GRN. But the buckle wasn't buried with the man, and it doesn't seem to exist anymore, so there's still some questions about those initials. A decade later, Otie's daughter-in-law, Margaret Ames, would move back to Savannah, Washington with her husband. She would meet and become friends with Spencer Fuentes through a local Lutheran church. In fact, she would frequently go blueberry picking on their farm, which was pretty near to where Otie was found. But because that's not a conversation one would expect to have with each other, Margaret had no idea that Spencer had found the remains of a man a decade before. Nor did Margaret mention her missing father-in-law. After all, a decade had passed, and no one believed that Otie was still alive because of how old he was when he disappeared. 42 years would pass without Otie's family having any idea what happened to him. Snohomish County had been working hard in recent years with Othram Labs to identify all of the John and Jane Does from the area. Out of a dozen cases, only 4 remain. And with this, Otie again had his name. Stilly John Doe was actually Othaniel Philip Ames, who was 82 at the time. And now his daughter-in-law Margaret is almost the exact same age as Otie was when he went missing. The authorities confirmed the man's name at a press conference in November of 2022. They would explain that he was a dairyman from the Midwest and that Margaret's friend Spencer had found Otie all those years ago. "I grabbed myself," she said, "and I thought, oh my God, Spencer. He was a teenager. He's now in his 50s. Otie's daughter-in-law knew that Otie had lost touch with his family around 1980, but she never guessed. A few months before he was found, it was mentioned that he was going on a trip. She would go on to say, "There have been many times when I thought about Otie and whatever happened to him, so this has brought some closure to me," and she thanked everybody. She said finally they were able to fill in some blanks. Otie was 20 when the United States entered World War I. His Army registration card was stamped in Bonesteel, South Dakota. Bonesteel had a population of 600 at the time, and Otie, like many of the other young men at the time, left to find ways to earn money. His name never came up in the draft, and Bonesteel slowly got smaller and smaller. He would go on to marry Lydia Newth in 1929. Lydia was 29 and he was 31. Just months later, the stock market crashed, and life became even harder than normal. By then, they were living in another tiny town, that of Cottonwood, South Dakota. By 1936, Otie had several kids and another on the way. The young family would make their way to Washington, and Lydia gave birth to their son later in the new home. They would go on to have one more boy. In the end, they had 2 boys and 2 girls. By the time World War I came around, he was 43, and he again avoided being drafted. His draft card states he was self-employed. The boy born to him shortly after the move was Walter, and he would serve in the armed forces, entering the Air Force. He would go on and marry a young woman who had grown up in Savannah, which is just 6 miles away from where Otie went missing. That was Margaret, and Margaret would explain that all 4 of Otie's kids have since passed, but she had a number of keepsakes, including photos of Otie, as does his grandniece. She has letters written by Otie's wife, Lydia, asking one of the kids how the land in western Washington was, before they even moved out there. Otie and his boys later built farm buildings on the land, and they had 7 dairy cows that they would milk multiple times a day. This was all done by hand, and Lydia worked hard cooking for everybody on a wood stove. Otie also made some money fashioning wood, salt, and pepper shakers. Things were hard back then, but they were happy. Otie would continue with his cows, and he also worked at a shingle mill. He enjoyed making dandelion wine in his spare time, and his grandniece still has his handwritten recipe. She would describe him as being a typical farmer. He was hard-working and he could be stern, but he was a good man. Where Lydia was quiet, Otie was boisterous. The couple would separate in the 1960s, but they never divorced. There was some upset in the house when the 2 boys went into the armed services. They did this when they were just teenagers. One of the daughters died only 10 years after her high school graduation. She was actually on the way to her 10-year reunion when it happened. The Ames family eventually sold off the farm, and while the 2 didn't divorce, they went their separate ways. Lydia moved to Everett, Washington, and Otie moved to a small cabin in the woods near Arlington, Washington, that didn't even have indoor plumbing. It's possible he knew what was coming because his niece Diane saw him around early 1980, and she said he wasn't doing very well. He was coughing a lot, but he refused to go to a doctor. He said he'd worked outside all of his life, and he had no desire to be cooped up anywhere. Before he disappeared, he gave Diane and her husband his old car, which was worth probably just a few $100s, whispering to her that inside there was a $20 emergency fund hidden that she could access if needed. He also gave them an old vintage gun. She would say there was no known reason for him giving these things away. Her sister-in-law thought later that maybe it was because he had been invited to Diane's wedding not long before, and she was on his mind. Around that same time, he gave a family Bible to a different niece. She knew the date it happened because it was inscribed in the dedication page. He also gave the deed to his cabin to a nursing student who lived nearby. Othaniel Philip Ames went unidentified for 42 years. He was 82 when he passed away. The Los Angeles John Doe, 1999. Identified as Edward Michael Weber. This Los Angeles John Doe was renting an apartment at the Frontier Hotel in Los Angeles, California. He passed away at that hotel, either without a name or with an alias, and he unfortunately wasn't found for several days. They estimated he was about 60 to 70 years old. If his cause of death was determined, it wasn't released. The entire case is just sad because outside of the photo that came back from his fingerprint, which was successfully processed in November of 2022, no one has come forward to claim his remains. I've included his name as profile and the phone number needed in order for somebody to claim him. Edward Michael Weber has gone unidentified for 22 years. As always, thank you so much for watching. The current goal for the channel is 20,000 subscribers. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss new episodes. Thank you so much to everybody commenting. Even with just an emoji, it really has made a big difference. Without it, there isn't a channel, so thank you guys so much. Take care of yourselves and each other.